My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
My name is Mason D'Amelio. I'm a first-year medical student at the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine, and you're listening to the DO or Do Not podcast. This week, we are joined by Dr. Josh Lenchus, who has been featured in the American Osteopathic Association's The DO many times, most recently as the first DO to be elected as the president of the Florida Medical Association. While giving insight to his journey, he embodies a quote from himself from the most recent article from the DO: "You should never let where you come from dictate where you go." Lenchus walks us through his journey of getting to medicine after starting his academic career by attending community college to save money. He will discuss his 3 years of working as a pharmacist before attending Nova Southeastern College of Osteopathic Medicine. He describes for us the trials and tribulations of his internal medicine residency at the prestigious University of Miami Jackson Memorial Hospital, where he was one of the first DOs. He will tell us about his first job there as a hospitalist at and share pearls of wisdom from his time as a residency director, which is invaluable to those applying to residency in any specialty. Finally, Dr. Lenchus will discuss his transition into administrative work and which ultimately led him to be selected as Chief Medical Officer at Broward Health. I hope you enjoy listening to this story and take his philosophy with you on whatever journey you choose to pursue.
All right, Josh, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. So usually we start with a very specific set of questions, and I'm going to go a little bit different with you. So I just wanted to start with why I specifically was so excited to have you on the podcast. Okay.
Okay.
So I was reading an article. I read the DO, they send that to my email. And you were highlighted actually a few times in the DO. But when I saw you, I had this flashback. And the flashback was I did my GI fellowship at Jackson Memorial. And I was chief resident in New York before I came to Jackson Memorial. And actually, the fellowship was University of Miami. So there were two hospitals that we rotated in. One was Mount Sinai Medical Center, where there was an osteopathic internal medicine program, and the other one was Jackson. And I feel like nothing against the Mount Sinai program, but the Mount Sinai program was good, but the residents, the internal medicine resident program at University of Miami was just very impressive to me coming from a program in New York. And I specifically remember meeting you and thinking that you were just a University of Miami. You were like a rock star among rock stars. You were just excellent.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, listen, I know the guys at Sinai, they have a great program there, but I'm a little biased because I trained with you down at Jackson. So yeah, there's definitely a bias there.
Right. So Josh, I guess my question to start, and again, this is a little different than what we normally do, but I did not know you were a DO when I first met you. There was no secret handshake. There was no DO bond. And obviously, I was very proud when I found out that you were. But I don't think there were a lot of DO internal medicine residents at the time. Most of the residents were at Mount Sinai. Like Mount Sinai was a DO program. And again, a little out of order, but were you the only DO? How did you get that position? How is it being at Jackson? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I was rotating actually in my last 2 years of medical school at Nova. I was rotating at what's now Broward Health Medical Center. It used to be Broward General up in Fort Lauderdale. And I had done a rotation down at Jackson on the acute nephrology consult service. And I loved it. The guy that was my attending at the time, Dr. Guido Perez, was a rock star. The guy was probably in his probably late 60s, but everything this guy said, you could not find in a textbook. I mean, it was decades of experience. And I was following the guy around like a little schoolboy, writing down everything. And I really tried to learn as much as I could. And when I finished the rotation, I asked him for a letter of recommendation. He wrote me one. It was very, very good. I applied to Jackson as my first choice, and I got into the internal medicine residency there. When I started, the year that I started there was a year after in Florida, we had that resolution 42 where DO grads had to complete a 1 year rotating internship, the equivalent of a transitional year or a prelim year. And I completed that. I started at Jackson. The year that I started there, one of the 4 chief residents was actually a DO. There was a guy who was in the 3rd year who was a DO, no DOs in the 2nd year, and I was the only DO in the 1st year. Now, each year there's probably about 30 or so, 30 to 40 residents per year. So in the 190 to 120 people that we had as a resident there were 3 DOs. Now, after my 1st year, when I moved into my 2nd year, that was it. The 3rd year left, the chief resident left, and I was the only 2nd year. And then there was 1 1st year that we took. So we went from a whopping number of 3 DO residents down to 2. So we lost a third that time. But yeah, it was very, very tough to get into that allopathic residency as a DO.
Now, Josh, again, it's impressive to me, and I can't stress enough that I was there for 3 years, so I saw a lot of residents go through. And to be honest, when I think of the residency, I always think of you. Like you were just amazing. And again, we're going to talk about your journey, but so you were associate program director there for a time?
Yeah, so when I finished the residency, during my residency, it was kind of a loudmouth of sorts, and I liked to affect change. And I think that change is born out of the guys that are actually doing it rather than top down. And so when I finished my residency at Jackson, the University of Miami actually hired me as a hospitalist right out of the gate. And I was out probably about 2 or 3 years before the program came to me and offered me an associate program director position, another first for a DO at Jackson.
And now I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about being a program director, and then we're going to go into what you're doing now, which is really what I want to focus on. But for our listeners, maybe want to apply to Jackson, and I know it's been a little time since you were in that seat. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you selected residents and, you know, what the process was like, maybe what you think is important, board scores, COMLEX, letters of recommendation? Can you talk to us a little bit about those things?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Ian, I give a 1 hour talk, so I'll distill that down into some bite-sized chunks for you guys. Yeah, I served as an associate program director for the internal medicine residency there for about 9 years. And in that 9 years, as you can imagine, we've interviewed hundreds of people, looked at thousands of applicants over that course of time. And I can tell you, I look at people mainly in three ways. I think the outermost layer, the layer that doesn't mean the most to me, is unfortunately is the step scores, what they did on the COMLEX or the USMLE, what numbers they are, what rank they are, what their GPA is. It doesn't mean a lot to me because anyone in academics knows that the science behind that is it only tells you what somebody could score on a test given that material on a given day. It's in no way, shape, or form is that test even created to prognosticate one's success as a resident or later as a doctor. But there has to be some way that there's a filter. So we look at that. The next layer that I look at after I peel that away is I look at the second layer of the onion, which is really who else are you? What are the activities that you're involved in? Were you involved in clubs or organizations in med school? Were you in leadership positions? Did you do research? Was that scholarly activity productive? Did you do abstracts, oral presentations, posters, authored papers, what have you? That kind of other stuff that people try to round out their CV with. But then really the nucleus of what really makes a great resident is really borne out in the letters of recommendation. The letters of recommendation and their context is what hold the most weight, not their letters of recommendation. Hey, I grew up next to Josh and I saw him play with my kids outside. That context doesn't mean anything. I'm not hiring somebody to be my neighbor. We're hiring people to be a resident. So I want to see what you are, what the applicant is on a day-to-day basis doing exactly what they're going to be doing for the rest of their life. So the letters of recommendation bear the most weight when we're considering taking a resident, and really it needs to be contextual. And I'll just end by saying that there's some sort of code with respect to letters of recommendation. I'll pull the curtain back on one. If anyone ever gets a letter of recommendation, it says Josh Lenchus was a good resident. Good does not mean good. Good is mediocre. It's average. It's not stellar. Many residencies are not looking for somebody who's good. They're looking for somebody who's great, who's exemplary, superb, superlative, outstanding, fantastic. Like there's a whole host of other adjectives that we're looking for. So yeah, that's in a snapshot. That's kind of how we identified people. And then I'll bookend with one other thing. We resident applicants have to stand out. What makes you different from someone else? And I remember advocating vigorously for a guy that worked for NASCAR in the pit crew. That's a whole other story that we can go into one day. But yeah, it is the thing that makes people stand out is really, really telling when you're looking at applicants trying to decipher one versus the other.
So Josh, that was awesome. My last little question just on that, the end of your statement. So I guess when it comes down to personal statement, a lot of times the medical students will ask me how important that is. So I guess if you have a compelling story and you tell it in your personal statement, that would hook you. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's a couple of basics on a personal statement. Grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes are absolute death traps. So you got to have this thing reviewed a couple of times to make sure that you're not making those kinds of avoidable mistakes. The letter of their personal statement shouldn't be more than one page. And you're absolutely right. That's where the compelling story is. Why did you choose medicine? Many people give stories about something that happened to their loved one or something that happened to themselves or somebody that's close to them as sort of the entree into medicine. But how are you going to build off of that passion or that drive or that motivation? What are you going to give to the program, and what do you see the program giving to you?
That's great. Yeah, I'm harsh with the letters when students ask me to review them. And many times they talk about the death of a loved one or something like that. And I tell them, I don't think everybody has a story like that. And although it's very nice, it's a waste of real estate. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you got it. If you're going to use that as a hook, like you said, many people do that. How are you going to transition that into showing who you're going to be as a resident physician, and then where do you anticipate moving forward with that? Because you're right. Again, it goes back to separating yourself from the fray.
Josh, that was awesome. Thank you for that. We're going to go now into Broward Health, and you're the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer. And can you tell us a little bit about Broward Health, about what the CMO does, and maybe what your week generally looks like if you have a typical week?
Yeah, so I'm privileged to have returned back to Broward Health Medical Center about 5 years ago and take the Chief Medical Officer role at that facility. And then 2 years ago, I took the Chief Medical Officer position for the whole health system. Broward Health is a tax-assisted system that has county funds. It serves the northern 2/3 of Broward County. It's about 2 million people or so within the county that fall in our service area. Broward Health operates 4 hospitals, a level 1 trauma center, a level 2 trauma center, 2 community hospitals. We have 2 hospitals that have behavioral health, 2 hospitals have women and children's that serve among a host of other services that we provide. And in total, the 4 hospitals are probably about 1,500 beds. So all 4 hospitals are about the same size as where we trained just at Jackson Memorial is about 1,500 beds. But it's very similar in terms of its patient population, depending on which hospital you go to. And the Chief Medical Officer position is kind of a unique position. It's the highest employed physician within the organization. So as Chief Medical Officer, other places have Chief Physician Executive or Chief Clinical Officer. They call them different things depending on the organization, but effectively you are in the C-suite you are a physician executive administrator for the system, and your job is mainly to manage everything related to physicians and clinical work. So under my purview, in my role, I had the ambulatory division, which encompassed our federal qualified health centers and our physician group, our employed physicians. I just offloaded that division, but I have graduate medical education. So all of the residencies report up to the designated institutional official, the one person, kind of the czar of all the residencies and fellows. That person reports to me. I also have quality, risk, patient safety, and claims, clinical claims. So that vice president reports up to me in an effort to try to standardize our quality approach to providing patient care across the system. I also have research and human protections, kind of the IRB component of it as well. And I also have the medical staff office and corporate credentialing. When physicians come on staff, they have to fill out applications and what their privileges are. And now I just picked up the pharmacy, undoubtedly because my background is as a pharmacist. So I picked up the pharmacy as well. My typical week there is frankly no typical week. I mean, the day is really filled with a host of different meetings scattered throughout the day, both internal and external. And since I manage or I oversee 4 different hospitals, I try to make it a point throughout the month to kind of bounce around to the different hospitals, because the biggest way that one could be successful as chief medical officer is relationship building. The only way that you're going to get anything done is when people know and respect you for your sort of pedigree and for you showing up and making the effort to engage them in whatever the issue of the day is. So I really try to make it a point to bounce around to the 4 hospitals and show my face and interact with the staff, tell them who I am for the 15th time, just so that they know, and then they have you as a resource as chief medical officer.
That is some job description. Holy moly. That's a lot. Now, Josh, the article that I mentioned earlier in the DO, it was really like a little bit about that, which sounds like that could be a whole article on itself or a whole book on itself. But it was actually talking about the fact that you were president of the Florida State Medical Society. Now, are you still doing that now? And how do you have time to do that?
Yeah, so incredible honor and privilege. I've been involved with the Florida Medical Association for almost 20 years now. In the beginning, I really didn't do a lot, but over the last decade, I've really invested time and effort into being involved in that medical association, and that has culminated in my election as the 146th president, the first DO ever for the Florida Medical Association. And it's an incredible honor to have shattered that glass ceiling. And I credit a lot of that with 5 years ago, I was the Florida Osteopathic Medical Association. So I'm the first guy to have ever served as president of both state medical associations. And it's been fantastic. I have about 4 weeks left of my 1-year tenure, and then I move on to immediate past president.
That's amazing. Again, your resume is, for a young man, sounds like it's quite extensive. So we're going to talk about that. So now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I want to go back to the beginning. Can you tell us where you grew up and when you decided you wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn, actually, so not far from where you are. We moved down when my great-grandparents moved down to Florida in the 80s. We moved down. I was early teens when I came down here. And I always was sort of fascinated with medicine. And even on my application, even my personal statement to pharmacy school, because I got my undergraduate degree in pharmacy, then practiced for 3 years. But in my personal statement for pharmacy school, I actually put on there that I was going to go back to medical school at some point in the future. And despite that, they still took me in pharmacy school. So I think I've known that I wanted to be a doctor from an early age. I'm the first one in my immediate family to have graduated from college. No one in my family is in the medical field, so I didn't really have that to fall back on or to use as a reference. I was just sort of fascinated with it, and luckily that's the field that I was able to pursue.
Now, Josh, again, I'm quoting one of the articles, but it said you actually started in community college. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm the eldest of four boys. So when I was finishing my high school, a lot of my friends were going off to the University of Florida, and I wanted to go there. And at the time, the University of Florida was kind of tough to get into, not nearly as tough as it is now, but I didn't have a lot of money growing up, and it was going to be financially prohibitive for me to go there. I read about Broward Community College, which was what it was called then. Now it's called Broward College. Broward Community College offered a full tuition ride for your associate's degree if you graduated in the top 10% of your high school class. And I think they drew the line right after they called my name. So I was very lucky. I went to community college, and I was misguided in my first year there. So I wound up taking 3 years in community college, and but I finished community college, and I was really able to satisfy all the prerequisites, get an associate's degree, and move on to the University of Florida. During my 3 years there, I got involved in a lot of different organizations and had the privilege of being inducted into Phi Theta Kappa, which is the equivalent of Phi Beta Kappa for junior colleges. And that really opened the door for a number of scholarships and grants and loans and just made me going to University of Florida much more affordable.
So, Josh, now tell us about you. You alluded to the fact that you studied pharmacy. Tell us about graduating, working as a pharmacist, and then what it looked like applying to medical school and when you first learned about osteopathic medicine.
Yeah, great question. So I finished pharmacy school at the University of Florida. I got out, I practiced for 3 years. And then I went back to medical school at Nova. During the 3 years that I was practicing, about the first 9 or 10 months, I actually worked at Walgreens. At the time, Walgreens had it was sort of an HCA-ish model, if you will, where you took a small stipend while you were in pharmacy school from Walgreens, and they guaranteed that you would have a job. They would employ you once you got out of pharmacy school. So I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. You're telling me I don't have to go out and look for a job when I get out of here? I mean, that seems almost too good to be true. I took the job and I spent about 9 or 10 months there and quickly realized that community or retail pharmacy was not for me. I left there and I went to a hospital. I worked at a hospital pharmacy, creating the position of hospital pharmacist, in fact, clinical pharmacist. And I worked there for about 2.5 years. During my time in the hospital was really when my eyes were open to osteopathic medicine. A number of the guys, the attendings that were there were DOs. In fact, they had a family medicine DO residency that was there. So I got to interact with the residents and really become sort of fascinated with that sort of holistic mind, body, spirit approach to how osteopathic physicians approached folks. There were MDs that were there as well, and I befriended a number of them. And it took me a little while to sort of get the letters of recommendation and pursue interviews. I remember I was doing this. I had no guidance whatsoever. I didn't know what I was doing. So, in fact, I like to joke around with some people now. I think it's kind of funny, but the first year that I didn't think it was funny then, but the first year that I applied to medical school, I have no idea what medical school entails. I don't know what medical school is. So I go down the list of medical schools and I pick only the schools that I've ever heard of. So things like Stanford and Yale and Harvard and Hopkins, and that was outside of the realm of my possibility, of course, but I had never heard of some of these other schools. So I just went by what I heard. That didn't work out very well. The second time that I applied, I did it a little bit more intelligent in my approach. I looked at all the schools within the state of Florida, but all the schools outside the state that had of their entering class, more than 50% of their entering class actually came from outside their own state. So I figured I had a pretty good chance of getting in to one of those out-of-state schools. I got an interview at the time at Nova, but it was very, very late in the game, so I didn't know that then. So I didn't make the cut there. And then the third time around, I guess third time's a charm, 3 years community college and 3 times to get into med school. But so I finally was able to join the entering class at Nova.
So Josh, can you just tell us briefly what it was like being at Nova, what your experience was like, and what type of people you met while you were there?
Yeah, I had a fantastic time at Nova. Many osteopathic physicians follow this sort of non-traditional route, and I think as a profession, we're sort of proud of that. So I was already in the real world. I was already working, making money, and to go back to medical school was not like, and I'm not being insulting here, I hope, but it was a little different than going to medical school straight out of college, where you didn't really sacrifice much. You just sort of postponed your entry. I sacrificed an annual salary and took on debt on top of that to go to medical school. So when I went to medical school, I kind of bonded with some of the other guys that had this sort of as a second-ish career, some of the older guys. And we had a different approach. We wanted to milk every ounce of knowledge that we could out of this experience because we were paying an arm and a leg to get it. The school I thought was very, very good in terms of its education. I bonded well with a number of teachers that were there. I will have to admit I did skip the class on pharmacology, having already been a licensed pharmacist. I did get an A in that class, but I would expect that after spending 6 years doing pharmacy, that I would hope that I'd get an A in that class. But I really had a fantastic time, and the entree into the clinical world, even as a first year student, as an osteopathic student, I think really helped in terms of speeding up the process with which we integrate that clinical approach to the work that we're doing. It's not just all book work, but you see that, and then you go out and you spend half an afternoon or half a day a week with a doctor that's actually practicing. You can integrate a lot faster and to a greater degree. So I had a fantastic time at the college, and I think it really set me up for tremendous success.
There's no question in my mind that you are successful. So that's good to hear. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I kind of went out of order. So we spoke a little bit about you finished at Nova, you were accepted into internal medicine at Jackson, you were attending at Jackson, associate program director at Jackson. Can you take us now into the period between being in academic medicine? What made you decide to go into administration and sort of the years in between finishing your work at Jackson to where you are now?
Yeah. So at Jackson, because again, I'm a loudmouth and I like to affect change. So as soon as I got hired by the University of Miami, some folks in the medical staff office down at Jackson said, listen, you have to get involved on the credentials committee. And I didn't really have any idea what they were talking about, but these were people that had always looked out for me. If they were pointing me in this direction, it could only be something that's positive. And I said, sure, I'll get on the credentials committee. And I learned a lot over the years that I was on that committee. And I took on progressively larger roles, not just in that committee, but in other medical staff committees. I was serving as an associate program director. I had this fantastic idea about doing simulation-based invasive bedside procedural training, and I developed a curriculum about that a couple of years out of residency. So that got me working in their Center for Patient Safety with the Department of Anesthesiology, and I sort of started to build up a pretty decent repertoire, both on the clinical work side, or I should say all in the clinical work side, in education. I was able to use that curriculum that I developed, that program that I developed, to do research. And then on my administrative front, just the involvement in a number of these committees really helped. So I was sort of, the ship was rising on kind of all of these tides. And as I progressively became more and more involved, the credentials committee really served as the vehicle for me to juggernaut my administrative involvement, because I moved up from just a member that didn't really know anything to a guy that kind of knew what was going on. And then I became vice chair of that committee, and then ultimately chair chair of that committee also made me effectively vice chief of the medical staff, or vice president of the medical staff. And then I ran for president of the medical staff. And again, first DO in almost 100-year history at Jackson to serve as president of the Jackson Health System medical staff. When I was looking at that, I did that for 6 years. And as that was coming to its completion, I sort of thought about the different paths that I could take. I could go back and do all clinical work. I could continue in the educational track and perhaps be a program director and then maybe a dean kind of thing. I could take that path. I could go more within my department. So as a hospitalist, I could run for or apply for maybe division chief and then department chair. And then you could also hit the dean way that way. Or I could follow the administrative track and I could go to what was the natural next step, which was the chief medical officer. There was a chief medical officer already at that institution. And so he was relatively new, and I didn't see that he was going anywhere anytime soon. I didn't really see the path for me in the educational realm. Again, great program directors down there. I don't think that I could boot any of those out. And we had a relatively new division and department chair lineup. So I thought, well, that's pretty solid. They're not going to change horses this early on. So I thought, well, let me follow this administrative route. And sure enough, there was a position opening around the same time that I was looking to make the jump from Miami. There was a position open up in the Fort Lauderdale area for this chief medical officer position, and I jumped at it.
Josh, I love, just to take a little sidestep, I always say good doctors approach problems the same way as they would approach patient care. So I feel like you just gave us a differential diagnosis and analysis in medical terms of where your career should go. Do you agree with that?
100%. That's exactly how we look at it, right? What are the different paths? If I do this, where does that lead? If I do this intervention, where 100%, man. But that's how we're built, Ian.
It's amazing, Josh. So Josh, first of all, you are amazing. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I have just a few final questions. The first question, or the first thing I want to do, is I'm going to read a quote which was in the DO, and it says, and this is from you, "I know I'm not the smartest, fastest, or strongest man. I was not the valedictorian in high school. I didn't finish #1 in community college or pharmacy or medical school, but I made it to where I belong. You should never let where you come from dictate where you go." That's awesome.
Well, thank you very much, my friend.
Do you have anything to add to that? I mean, can you just extrapolate a little bit? I mean, I just think that quote is amazing.
The God honest truth, Ian. I think many times people look at challenges and adversity that we face in life, and we think, I'm just kind of resigned to be where I am, and I don't think that I can do it. And I think by far in general, the world is happy with you to just be mediocre, and for you to not push, and you to not try harder, or not get up one more time off the mat. And I think that that's all it takes in order to do all of these things. Just get up one more time, take one more step forward. It doesn't matter where you came from, because that's in the past. What matters is where you're going and how do you get there. And that does not involve taking steps backwards. It involves taking steps forward. So I think that persistence and dogged determination and motivation, if this is what you want to do, what are you going to do to get there? It's not going to be handed to you. So what do you need to do to get there? And don't let what has happened in the past be the anchor that drags you down. Cut that loose and move forward.
Josh, that's amazing. Amazing. So
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I usually ask another question, which is, and I'm gonna pose it to you anyway, but I don't even think we need it. I think that I would end with that. But usually the finale question is, do you have one piece of advice that maybe you were given from someone else that always rings true and you think about that you would pass on to our listeners?
Along the lines of what I just said, I have been told that you can't do something so many times that I can't even count. And I don't do it to sort of spite someone else or to sort of show them that yes, I can. I do it really because I need to know for myself that I can do it. And doing it, I think just proves it. You know, I somebody asked me one time, they said, "Hey, aren't you must be so proud to have been the first DO to do this, and this." And I said, "Listen, I'm very honored and humbled to have been that guy. But you know what would make me even prouder are all of the DOs that can now follow, because somebody had to be the first guy to break it. And that's great. I'm very fortunate to have been that guy in all of these things, but I'm way more proud of the guys that are going to come behind me and now be able to do all of these things because somebody has paved that way for them."
Josh, that's awesome. Again, to echo, I appreciate your time. I'm proud of you. I think you're amazing. And just everything you've done is spectacular.
Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on tonight.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tianyu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.